So hello everyone. So maybe let's just wait a few seconds. Okay, I think we have in attendance. So hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on you are. Welcome to this week's Network Friday section, exploring mental and marine life through seismology. So I'm Rita Silva. I'm a geologist and assistant researcher at the Research Institute for Volcanology and Risk Assessment at the Azores University. Although my geologic background, my work focuses in volcanic seismology, studying how seismic signals help us understand our volcanic systems and the process that happen beneath the surface. So it's a great pleasure that I will be moderating today's section titled Charting the Geo and Biosphere with Upflow, Ocean Bottom Seismology Data and Beyond. So before we begin, I would like to thank your center for the invitation and for organizing these sections. And thank you all for joining us online. So we will dive literally deep into the earth, exploring how mantle upwellings, so those slow movements of hot material that rise from the deep mantle and which remain poorly understood, how they can influence the ocean floor, volcanic islands, and the border surface environment. All of these aboard of the UPFLOW project. So this project, founded by the European Research Council, uses innovative seismic imaging and ocean bottom seismometers to study the connection between deep earth process and what we observe at the surface through the largest ocean bottom seismic experiments ever conducted in the Atlantic with a collaboration of more than 10 institutions across 5 countries. So, UPFLOW is not only expanding the frontiers of geoscience, but also showcasing the power of international cooperation in addressing some of the Earth's most complex scientific questions. Beyond breakthroughs in geophysics and data collected, also enabling unexpected interdisciplinary research, including in marine biology and oceanography. So it's with great enthusiasm that I introduce Professora Ana Ferreira from the Department of Earth Science and the University College London. Hi, Ana. Ana is internationally recognized for her pioneering work in developing new ways to imagine earthquake sources and the Earth interior, and for leading major analysis of global seismic data. She currently leads an international and diverse team of over more than 20 researchers from 5 countries as a part of her UPFLOW project. Beyond her scientific achievements, Anna is also deeply committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion in geoscience, serving as a core chair of UCL Earth Science EDA committee and leading several initiatives to promote inclusion across the fields. So, Anna, it's an honor to have you with us today. Thank you for joining. So before we start, just a quick note. Anna will speak for about 45, 50 minutes. And afterwards, we will have time, 15, 10 minutes for questions. Okay, so everyone, feel free to type your questions in the chat anytime. Okay, so without further ado, Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rita, for the very generous and kind introduction. And also thank you so much to the Air Center for the honor to present our work and hopefully have some very nice discussions in this Networking Friday. So I'll share my screen. Okay. Here we are. Okay. Is that good? Can you see my screen fine? Yes, okay, great. Thank you for the thumbs up, Rita. Thank you. So as Rita very nicely introduced, I'm going to talk about the UPFLOW project. This is funded by the European Research Council, and it's also a partnership with IPMA. In particular, it was initiated together with Miguel Miranda from IPMA, who contributed quite a bit, as you will see, to the project and to make it possible to happen. And as you can see, I'm a seismologist, and so the main ingredient for seismology is using seismograms. And so if you look here already at the UPFLOW logo, we have an example of a seismogram, these little wiggles as a, let's say, as a function of time going like this, which are basically recordings of ground motions. Now, in UPFLOW, we use very special seismograms. We use seismograms that are recorded in the seafloor. For over a year in the Atlantic Ocean. And here in this picture, you see an example of an instrument at the surface after having recorded very nice data for over a year. And this is at the moment we are recovering. As you can see, very high-tech technology to recover the instruments. Thanks to the very dedicated crew. Without them, it wouldn't be possible. We would still be trying to fish the instruments. And so today I'm going to tell you how we can use these seismograms recorded in the seafloor in the Atlantic to explore the Earth's interior, but also marine biology applications, and so the biosphere, not just the geosphere. Now, I must say that none of this work would not be possible without the UPFLOW team. I'm going to acknowledge some specific people that have done a lot of work that I will present today, but also I will discuss some ideas going beyond UPFLOW towards the end of the presentation. And many of those ideas have been really developed together with over 50 participants in some discussion and brainstorming ideas meetings that we've had at a number of international conferences that are listed here. I could not list everybody, but they know who they are, and I'm very grateful for the input and looking forward to continue dreaming together, let's call it like that, as you will see. Now, the, let's say, official goal of the UPFLOW project is to develop new seismic imaging approaches, as Rita kindly introduced, and in particular to come up with new inverse methods and new observable design methods, so trying to get more and more out of our seismic data to build very high resolution images of the Earth's interior. And this is an example of a figure I've built for the proposal, actually, of the project, which shows one example of image that we built with global seismic data at the bottom of the mantle at about 2,800 kilometers depth. So for reference, we've got here the Azores, where the air center is based. And you can see at these large depths, we have these red regions, which are regions where seismic waves travel slower than on average. And we have these blue regions, which are regions where seismic waves travel faster than average. And you can see these two large provinces of low velocities, these red regions, one beneath Africa, one beneath the Pacific. And there has been a lot of discussion that at least in some places at the surface, there might be connections between, say, observed volcanism, between observed volcanic islands in particular, and these deeper structures. So the green stars that you see here are the so-called hotspots, which at least some of them might result, as I was mentioning, might result from very deep upward motions coming from very deep inside the mantle. But it's still not fully understood, and most likely not all of these hotspots actually are connected to such deep, and maybe are more like shallower processes. But the ultimate goal really of the project with these enhanced images is to understand those upward motions and to understand these connections between very deep-seated structures, such as these very large low-velocity provinces, as we call them, at the bottom of the mantle, and shallower features, even volcanism. Now, there have been many ideas and many suggestions, notably from geodynamics, as shown here in this cartoon, from experiments, but also from numerical simulations, suggesting that these upwelling motions might have different a wide range of morphologies, as shown here, from these very large domes to very small scale features to this very classical view of this mushroom type of upwelling motion. It's also called mantle plume. But it's still very much up to debate, really, what is the shape, what is the dynamics, do they really exist, at least in some places, these mantle plumes. And so ultimately, that's the sort of big scientific goal that we want to address. Now, as I mentioned, we have this part of the goal is to have new imaging techniques, to have better and better images, particularly with uncertainty quantification, to understand these questions. But also the second part of the project was to collect new data, in particular this ocean bottom seismometer data from the mid-Atlantic, so the UPFLOW experiment, because as you can see, a lot of these upwellings and hotspots are actually in the oceans or associated with volcano islands. And so it's really important to get more data, and the oceans are really very under instrumented in seismology. We have lots of sessions on land, but not so many in the oceans. So that really motivated the experiment. And so essentially the experiment, the expeditions, in 2021, in the summer 2021, during 4 weeks, we deployed 50 broadband ocean bottom seismometers. So each little dot that you see here in the map corresponds to one instrument that was deployed on the seafloor. You can see we then stopped in the Azores, in Ponta Delgada, for a couple of days. And then the second part of the expedition is in green, but green and red is the same. It's just the ocean bottom seismometer. Now, during the experiment in 2022, as many of you will know, a seismic swarm started in São Jorge Island. And so this prompted us to actually apply for further funding, in that case from the UK National Environmental Research Council, to get more ocean bottom seismometers. So we managed to secure 6 short period seismometers that we installed around the island. Importantly, we had a very, very strong partnership with lots of Portuguese institutions, notably with Rita from Civisa, and without whom, a lot of the work would not have been possible, and also particularly with the Azores local government, which was absolutely crucial for the experiment to happen, particularly the Navy. The Navy deployed in the Azores really was crucial to be able to deploy and recover the instruments, and they were absolutely fantastic. It was great to work with them, but also our colleagues in Civisa and also in continental Portugal, in IPMA, IDL, ISEL, and so on, all also deployed and helped also at land stations. And so we worked all together to gather all of this data, particularly from the short period ocean bottom seismometers, but also from land stations. It's been really nice. Coming back to UPFLOW, so in 2022, we then went back to recover our instruments. Sadly, we lost one. But on the other hand, in the grand scheme of things, it was a prototype, so developed by colleagues at IDL. So maybe not entirely surprising that we lose it because it was still under testing. But as well, if we bear in mind that OBS experiments often have 5% loss of instruments, this was actually quite remarkable that we only lost one, and it was a prototype. So that was really a very good outcome. We used IPMA's research vessel Mário Ruivo, which again was part of the partnership with IPMA in the UPFLOW project. And it was really fantastic to have this ship as part of the project rather than having to apply for ship time separately, which can be really complicated. So that was also crucial for the success of the project. And again, Miguel Miranda and Mafalda Carapuço, who was at the time manager of Mário Ruivo, were absolutely incredible to support the project. As you can imagine, this type of experiments have lots of logistics hurdles, and it was always possible to come up with solutions, which was great. So in total, each expedition covered over 9,800 kilometers, so really very large. And as Rita mentioned in her introduction, this was actually the largest so far passive experiment, OBS experiment in the Atlantic. In total, there were 22 scientists from 5 different countries, so very nice, multinational, multi-age, very mixed group, which worked really well. We had great environment. We learned a lot from each other. But also, very importantly, we had 17 ship crew members who, again, were absolutely fantastic and really incredibly useful at deploying the instrument, like using cranes, and also at recovering them. We obtained over 1 year of recordings, so up to about 14 months in some cases. And additionally, we also did lots of outreach activities, particularly when we deployed, because we had quite a bit of time between each deployment. And so we had like Zoom calls with school kids. There were lots of postings on social media. Please check out. There's lots of videos and pictures and blog entries, particularly in our website here. So it was very rewarding, especially with the children. They then gave us feedback. They made drawings of the OBSs, and also they named the OBSs. So each OBS has a name that a kid from primary schools named. So it's really great. Now, how do the instruments look like? The vast majority look like this so-called lobster instruments. This is the prototype from ITL, June. We recovered 3 of them, and this is a smaller module that I showed before in my first picture, this NAMU. And so you have basically these orange bits are just foam that allows the instrument to float when it comes back to the surface. You have an anchor that pulls the instrument down, because we just put it very carefully at the surface of the water with a crane, and then we let it fall by free fall, and then it stays in the seafloor recording until we recover it. And it's a bit of a surprise when we recover it, because we really at this stage cannot access the data while it is recording. It's only after the end of the expedition. And then you have quite a bit of bits and bobs, like the sensors themselves, the seismometer, batteries to power the system. We have a hydrophone, as well as flags to then be able to see the instrument, beacons, flashers. So lots of bits and bobs that I will also talk about in the presentation. Now, as you can imagine, the first thing you do when you recover all of this data, so it's a lot of data from 49 instruments, recording for over a year. Each instrument has 3 components, 3 perpendicular components, so you can multiply by 3. We recorded sampling rates ranging from 100 hertz to 250 hertz. And we also have the hydrophone, so 4 components in total times 49. So you can start seeing there's really quite a lot of data to analyze. And so we spent quite some time, particularly Maria Czech-Mistrenko, one former postdoc in the group, but still very strong and close collaborator to the project, spent a lot of time checking the quality of the data. And so what you see here are all the instruments. Actually, the one we lost is this one here in black. And so they are the symbols correspond to these different models that I just showed you, the lobster, the NAMU, from different providers, let's say different pools of instruments, the Dune from ITL. And essentially they are colored by data quality, okay? So when it's green, it means all went well. When it's red, there was some issue. So for instance, up 10, sadly, what happened there is that when we recovered it, we saw there was lots of corrosion in some pins in one of the plugs. And what we think that happened is actually that plug must have got damaged actually already at deployment time. And then those pins got corroded and the data got completely corrupted, which is a pity. But what you can see is that actually the vast majority, fortunately, are mostly green. So there's really very high quality. And if you ask me what does high quality mean, is that essentially the noise levels of all of these different instruments are pretty much comparable or even lower than to previous OBS experiments. So it's quite successful. By the way, on the right, it's the data quality of the seismometer data, the 3 component seismometer data, whereas on the left is from the hydrophone data, which is also quite valuable data. And this table here just shows the different types of sensors and recorders. So most of the instruments had this so-called lobster that I showed model with trillium seismometers, which are relatively broadband with a wide frequency range of recording. So also quite exciting is that we have now the data all in standard seismological formats. It's quite a lot of work when it comes to OBS data, because, for instance, the times are tricky. The instruments drift over time because they are not synchronized with GPS when they are in the seafloor. We spent a lot of time to correct the times and also some other formatting issues compared to land stations, but that's all done. And we have deposited the data in one of the ADA nodes. ADA is one of the it's the European data center for seismological data. And so the data are embargoed for now, but in 2028, it's going to be open to everyone. And we are very proud of this, because obviously this is an extremely expensive experiment. It's funded by European funds, so it should be really made open to everybody. And we're very happy that it's going to be open and hopefully very much used by lots of further researchers in the future. Okay, so to give you some overview of what we are doing, with what is the work that we are doing. So when it comes to the solid Earth and staying faithful to our initial goal of the project, we are doing so-called tomography work. So it's building images of the Earth's interior, pretty much like when you go to hospital and you do a CAT scan of your body. It's the same sort of technique. But in this case, what we use is seismic waves. So waves that propagate inside the Earth, lots of crisscrossing waves. We record them in upflow, but also globally at other stations. We combine all of this data through some mathematical algorithms to then build these images of the Earth's interior. This is an example from Maria Czechny-Strenka that also did all of this data quality analysis work that I mentioned. And I'll show a little bit more afterwards some of the results that Maria is getting. Then we have a PhD student, Katrina Harris, who is also doing tomography. This is a section, constant depth section at about 120 kilometers depth. And so this is work using a different type of data. Again, I will show a little bit more in detail what she's doing. But in this case, it's showing not just wave speed. So remember, red is slow, blue is fast. But she's also looking at so-called anisotropy, which is the directional dependence of wave speed, which is a more direct proxy for mantle flow, which is what we want to understand ultimately, is particularly to understand these upward motions. And so these are some initial results of Katrina look into this anisotropy property. This is again the Azores, a triple junction here. And so I'll show more details later on. We also have Suruj Vaisi, a postdoc in our group, and he's doing global scale inversions, combining all sorts of different data to try to enhance these images of the Earth's interior. And ultimately, we will try to enhance in our study region of the Azores, Madeira, Canary Islands, but also at the global scale. So this is ongoing work. We have then a range of collaborators, and I'm listing here really the people who are putting their hands in the data. Okay, there are many other people that we discuss with and that are helping us with interpretations and so on, but these are really our colleagues who are working directly on the data. So we've got ambient noise tomography and Rayleigh wave ellipticity analysis going on. Don't worry if you're not familiar with this. It's mostly imaging techniques focusing on the shallower part of the Earth, so mostly the crust and also even the sediment part. We've got, so this is Roberto Cabieses from ROA in Spain and Tae-Shin Kim from Kangwon University in Korea. We also have a very close collaboration with David Schlapphorst at ISEL in Portugal, and he's looking at this technique called receiver functions, which is very good to look at discontinuities inside the Earth, so notably in the crust, so the shallower part of the Earth, but also discontinuities in the mantle. And then we are also studying earthquakes because obviously upflow also recorded, and the Saint George extra stations recorded lots of seismicity. Many earthquakes. And so we've got quite a few people actually looking at complementary aspects of seismicity and momentensis, from Alex Saoulis, a PhD student at UCL, who has been developing in particular machine learning methods for getting better quantifications of uncertainties, particularly in these momentenses that describe the geometry of faulting and also the forces involved, but also machine learning methods for enhanced seismicity analysis, together also with Zipeng Zhang, a former, a visiting researcher at UCL and also from the Chinese Earthquake Administration. Steve Hicks has done a huge, incredible amount of work on the Saint George crisis, together with all our partners, notably from CIVISA, from IPMA, from IDL, and other institutions as well. And we've got Paulino Fetiu, a PhD student at IDL and University of Lisbon, with Susana Custodio, who is looking particularly at seismicity in the Terceira Rift. And then Chao Li is a visiting student from Nanjing University in China, who is building on what Steve did in Saint George, looking at VPVS ratios in particular associated with the Saint George crisis. So quite a lot of work going on in that direction. And then, because ultimately we want to interpret our images in terms of geodynamical processes, in terms of upwelling inside the Earth, we are also testing our images against geodynamical models. So this is an example of geodynamical model, a mantle flow model. So how, from basic physics, how flow evolves inside the Earth. And this is particularly done with Matteo Desiderio and also Will Sturgeon here. And finally, but not not at all less important, equally important, so I just a bit of water. We are collaborating with marine biologists, so particularly Andrea Pereira from University of Lisbon, IDL, Miriam Romagosa from University of the Azores, together also with Monica Silva. I'm sorry. We've got also a PhD student at UCL, Jocelyn Japnanto, looking at also exploring the upflow data to detect whales, fin whales in this case. Gabi Arieta is a PhD student at University of St. Andrews, looking at density, whale density, using also upflow data. And we've got Fran Felix, PhD student at University of the Azores, Oceanos, looking at noise, like soundscapes, and trying to come up with a noise model around the Azores area. I'm sorry, there's a bit more water. And so, looking forward, so this is just an overview. I'll just give now some highlight of some results that we are observing. Apologies again. And so the fascinating thing about OBSs when you compare with land stations from seismology is that the moment you put your instrument in the seafloor, you get a huge range of signals, okay? So this is a very classical signal. For those of you not familiar, this is an earthquake. This is actually a very large earthquake over magnitude 8 that occurred in Alaska, and it was recorded in upflow. So this is a recording from upflow. So this is the classical seismogram, a little bit like the one that I showed in the upflow logo, going from top to bottom. And so you have, this is the time series, so amplitude as a ground motion as a function of time, where you have your so-called body waves that propagate inside the Earth, and then the larger amplitude, so-called surface waves that come after. Now, this is a very useful way to look at data, but we also look at data in the frequency domain. And so we looked a lot of these so-called spectrograms, which is shown here, where now we've got frequency in the y-axis, still time. So this is about 4 hours of recordings. In the x-axis, just to give you some idea of the scale of the frequencies that we are talking about here, this is 10 hertz here roughly, and here it's about 100 seconds, so 0.01 hertz. And the color just tells you the power at these different frequencies and at these different times, okay? And we use, particularly with OBS data, as you will see shortly, we use a lot these spectrograms to try to identify different signals in our data. In this particular case, in the frequency domain, you really see pretty much just background noise before the earthquake, with some nice, interesting noise structures here, which are environmental and can be very useful for studying our environment, ocean wave-wave interactions, and so on. But then you have the earthquake arriving, so you have this very clear signal associated with the body waves, these first arrivals. And then later on, you have this beautiful curve here. So you can see that the arrival, your power, changes with frequency, okay? So the time, the arrival time really changes with frequency. This is the so-called phenomenon of dispersion, and which is very useful to then image the Earth's interior. But what is really remarkable is that when you look at this record, in the old days, the OBSs were incredibly noisy, but the technology has evolved in a way that now if a seismologist would not know that this is an OBS recording, they would believe this is a land station, a nice land station recording. This is like a classical textbook example of recording. And so it's really, we had lots of these recordings of earthquakes, which is really remarkable, and very high quality recordings. But as I mentioned, once you put your instrument in the seafloor, you have 3 components of seismometer, you have a hydrophone, you record lots of stuff. And by the way, this is vertical components seismometer recording. So this is an example of another time series. So time in the x-axis, 2 hours in total. In the top, we've got just the ground motion. So if you look at it, like, you don't see something like, what seismologists look like. You don't really see events. But when you look in the frequency domain, so now again, your spectrogram frequency in the y-axis is a function of time, and then colored by power, by the strength of the signal. And this is now higher frequency. So we are here, it's about 20 hertz. This is about 40 hertz. You start to see actually lots of interesting features. And for instance, we have this very clear signal here with some nice beating patterns, let's say. And this corresponds to fin whales, okay? And what we found immediately when we collected our data in the 2022 expedition recovering the instruments, we looked a lot at our data immediately on board of the vessel. We actually did a lot of work on formatting and processing the data already on board, which was really amazing. Great environment, everybody sharing, oh, I'm seeing this, oh, I'm seeing that, which was really great. And we saw immediately already lots and lots and lots of whale calls in our recordings. So that's a really nice example. You also see these interesting shapes here. This corresponds to a ship. So ship noise, signals of ships passing, not too far from the OBS. You see another one here. And so again, this motivates us that we can study ships and ship noise using this data. And we have lots of ship recordings because, as you know, in this region, there are lots of big ships passing, especially going from Europe to North America. So lots of ship signals as shown here. On top of it, we have a lot of these horizontal lines, these very sharp horizontal lines that you can see, for instance, here. And these actually correspond to reverberations of the instrument itself. So when I show you the picture of, say, the lobster model, I mentioned there are lots of bits and bobs, these yellow cylinders that are then the floating parts of the instrument. There are flags, there are flashers, so lots of bits. And these things, when they are in the seafloor and currents pass, they oscillate, and they oscillate with specific frequencies of oscillation. So these specific frequencies of vibration and their overtones really appear at these lines here. And this is, for a seismologist, this is nuisance, this is noise. We don't want this. This is polluting our, say, earthquake signals. But actually, it can be very useful for other purposes, such as, for instance, for studying ocean currents, because they get more strongly excited by currents, and particularly with certain directions. And so actually, if we can understand these signals, if we can detect them systematically and understand them, potentially we might be able to study ocean currents. And this is something, by the way, that Carlos Corella, for instance, a colleague from IDL, has been studied well before upflow. And we really, when we saw our observations, we got really excited as well to explore upflow data, building on work that, for instance, Carlos and other colleagues elsewhere that have done. And then finally, we had surprises and unexpected signals. And so, for instance, one very unexpected signal was essentially in 2022, in early 2022, as you remember from the news, there was the Hunga Tonga eruption. Remember, Hunga Tonga eruption was on the other side of the planet, on the antipode, really, of the upflow experiment. But just for fun, we thought, oh, let's see if we actually see it in our upflow data. And actually we do. And so every line that you see here, every horizontal line corresponds to an upflow station. And so this is sorted by distance. These numbers here are the distance from Hunga Tonga, from the eruption. And this is as a function of time after the eruption. And what you see here, so this is the time of the eruption, this line here, and this window here corresponds just to seismic waves from the eruption. So this, the eruption generated energy equivalent to some magnitude 6 plus earthquake, and we detect it, which is quite nice. But even more remarkable, in the hydrophones, we see these signals here. And these are actually much slower waves, which are pressure disturbances on the seafloor. And these are associated with the lumb waves from the Tonga eruption, because the Tonga eruption, as you probably heard on the news, generated these waves in the atmosphere, these lumb waves, which are waves trapped in the atmosphere that traveled many times around the Earth. And what we saw is that these waves coupled with the ocean, and we could record them in the seafloor, which is really quite remarkable. We're talking about ocean depths of about 5 kilometers in many places. So we can see them 5 kilometers deep inside, beneath the water column, these waves, these pressure waves generated on the other side of the planet. So obviously this really made it to the news. The BBC was very excited and so on. And as you can see, this is a station actually in São Miguel, that detects atmospheric pressures, and it's really very coherent with what we see in upflows. It's really quite a cool observation. So unexpected signals. Other unexpected signals were, for instance, some of you might remember the Felicity Ace ship, a vessel that sank offshore the Azores. So fortunately, everybody was rescued. There were no casualties, just lots of economic damage because the ship was full of luxury cars coming from Germany, like Lamborghinis and others, and it sank. was set on fire, the fire started and eventually sank. And we saw those signals as well. We could even do some simple triangulation to see where the sinking actually happened. So I usually joke that if you want to find a Lamborghini, I can tell you where to find it, not too far from the Azores. But yeah, good luck getting it from the seafloor. Okay, so lots of exciting features. And so particularly what we got excited was with these reverberations for looking into currents and whale signals. So many of them is like, it's impossible to do this manually, or even with some semi-automated methods, it would be really laborious. And so we are lucky that we got a really great team, the R-Reverb team of collaborators from UPFLOW. This is, again, Alex Solis from a PhD student with us, with lots of experience on machine learning that has been really crucial for this part of the work. Afonso Loureiro from IDL, the University of Lisbon, now RDT, also who has quite a lot of experience also looking together with Carlos at these reverberations, and Maria Chekmistrenko, our first really postdoc in the project and still strongly collaborating. And so with Alex, and without entering into too many details, essentially we developed this new approach, new machine learning approach based on semantic segmentation, which is kind of a mouthful, but essentially the big idea of semantic segmentation compared with traditional classification methods in machine learning is that it's a pixel level. It gives us pixel level information, okay? And so what you do is you start with your data. So this is a spectrogram with your reverberations, these horizontal lines. And then you have this encoder that extracts feature of the spectrogram, and then you have a decoder that composes those features to make these predictions. So it basically transforms your initial kind of noisy image into extracting the features of interest. But what is important here is that it gives us pixel level detail. So you can see here like some separation, for instance, rather than just a straight line. So we tend to say that this pixel level technique, which has not been really explored in seismology up to now, instead of just telling you, is there reverberation in my time window, it tells you where is the reverberation in my time window. So it gives you more detail than classical classification methods. And so the same way we can apply it to reverberations, we can also apply it to whale calls. So this is an example of input whale calls from blue whales, and this is then what you get. And so we tested extensively the method. I'm not entering the details. The paper hopefully will be out, it won't take too long. But this is an example now of some nice whale call, blue whale call detections. So these are detections, okay? We are not interpreting them in terms of migration or even densities. It's just call detections over the whole deployment. And this is done very, very quickly, much more quickly than in traditional ways. And so I'm going to run a movie now. Just keep your eyes here. You're going to have bubbles for each station on the number of calls detected over the whole deployment. So this is the time here, and this is actually the overall. You already got the answer here, the overall number of calls. And you're going to see now the spatial distribution of those calls. And so you can see some little bubbles starting to appear, some calls starting to appear. Look. Over the whole deployment as we are running. So more calls appearing and then falling down. And you can see really the majority of the calls are detected in winter, so from November to March. And marine biologists know that this is the case. And what is really remarkable here, as I say, is that we make this catalog of blue whale calls much, much more efficiently than with classical methods. And so now we are working with marine biologists to interpret these results, to then try to understand them in terms of behavior of whales, and also use this as an input for density estimations and think about things like migration patterns and so on. But the main point is that it's a very efficient way. It saves a lot of time, and it's very reliable as well. We've done, I mean, not entering the details here, but we've done lots of tests, and it has, for instance, very few false positives and things like that. Another thing is that then with the technique, to really show that it works well, we then applied the same technique to data from a completely different OBS experiment that happened before. You can see 10 years before, the Ram experiment, which was in the Indian Ocean. So using these 4 OBSs from that experiment in the Indian Ocean, what we could do is we applied our technique, but we could actually track blue whales. And so the density colors that you see here is our estimated track of individual blue whale in the Indian Ocean in that day and at this time. And the red line is actually the result published in a paper by marine biologists using classical methods. And you can really see overall a nice agreement. And there are some assumptions that we've done for the location of the whales, but overall there's a really good agreement, which really also highlights the power of the technique. And this can be used for many other species and also applications. So if marine biologists are interested, or other even, we can look at ships as well. We can look at lots of different signals with the technique. It's quite easy to generalize. Okay, so switching now gears to applications in the geosphere. So essentially, as I mentioned before, we use seismic waves to build these images of the Earth's interior, pretty much like CAT scanning and so on. And so just giving a quick overview of some of Maria's initial work, she assembled over 5.8 million measurements of these so-called P waves. So it's these body waves going through the interior of the Earth, and also waves grazing at the core mantle boundary, so very deep inside the Earth at about 2,800 kilometers depth. And I'll just show you some examples of images that Maria is getting. So this is what I was showing you before. So this is a three-dimensional cross-section. So this is roughly where the Azores are. This is the coast of west coast of Africa, South America, and the little sphere in the middle, that's the core mantle boundary. So at about 2,800 kilometers depth. And what you can see, Maria is finding some very nice, interesting features, these low velocities beneath the Azores, and then these low velocities beneath at the core mantle boundary. So this large low velocity province that I talked about beneath Africa. And then if we twist a little bit the projections, so this is now the model centered now not in the Azores but in the Canaries. So again, the west coast of Africa is here. Sorry, it's not super easy to visualize, but you really can see this very complex connection between the Canaries and the lowermost mantle. Here, maybe there's a gap. So it's very three-dimensional, the structure, but as well, at least for now, we need to do more tests. There seems to be some possible lateral connection between the Canaries and the Azores, with the Azores not being directly connected to the very low mantle, lowermost mantle, but maybe with some lateral connection here between the two, which is really exciting. As I say, watch this space. This is initial results. Then I mentioned we've got also Katrina, this PhD student, doing this anisotropy tomography. And in this case, she's using so-called surface waves, so these later arrivals. And as the name says, they propagate along the surface of the Earth, so they give us more detail about the shallower structures. So Maria's work gives us particularly good information about the very deep structures, whereas Katrina's work tells us more about the shallower structures. And so these are the images that Katrina has been getting. So this is constant depth from 90 kilometers, 120 kilometers, 250, 350. Just to give some reference, this is the triple junction in the Azores. So we see very clearly the mid-ocean ridge. We see some structure also here around the Terceira Rift. As we get into this depths, like 120 kilometers, there's even some asymmetry, so more structures into the east, and then the structures become weaker as we get deeper, but lots of very interesting features. You can see the Canary Islands here, you can see Madeira, the Azores, so very, very interesting features. Let's look now how they look in depth sections, so along AA prime, BB prime, CC prime, but now crossing through the interior of the Earth. And so this is what you see AA prime, so going from the Azores to the Canaries, and we see these really fascinating features. This is about 400 kilometers there, so you see very nicely some clear connection. Same here, actually, in BB prime, between these different regions, with some connections, some maybe channels at about 300 kilometers depth. And so this is very interesting. This is very initial results. Katrina is still doing lots of tests to check if they are robust, but particularly in these regions here, they seem to be very robust. When as we go further to the Canaries, the coverage is not as good. But so at least to initially, it looks that there are some deep connections between all of these different archipelagos, let's say. And of course, we now need to think about what does that mean and work with geodynamicists to do the interpretation. But it's all really very fascinating. And then looking forward, okay, what shall we do beyond upflow? So in the Pacific, there's lots of OBS experiments, particularly coordinated between Japan, the US, now increasingly Korea, also Taiwan, and also German colleagues also often get involved. In the Atlantic, not so much. So the Atlantic, this is the upflow experiment, sea size is all, these are experiments focusing on upwellings. These are some experiments that Wayne Crawford from IPGP compiled, but we don't even know exactly where and when OBX experiments occurred in the Atlantic. And the data in the vast majority of cases are not being shared. And so this is a big issue because, as I said, these experiments are expensive. There are very few data in the ocean, so we need to put all of this together. And so we've developed the idea of let's have an Atlantic array. And so the dream would be, as you see in this picture here, many of you might have heard of the US array. The idea would be to cover the Atlantic like for 10 years. Every year we go through one of these tiles. And in 10 years, if we have, say, something like 100 ocean bottom seismometers, we could cover the Atlantic. So we've got this idea of this dream, really, of having this project, which would be primarily seismology driven, but also, as obviously with marine biology applications, oceanography, but also linking with new technologies, as many of you know, cables are a big thing right now. They are very useful for many things, but they still need to be validated and they need to be de-risked as well. And so that's the sort of idea. Have open data once the data have been properly corrected and formatted and so on. And so as I said, I made a very basic calculation. If we don't want to go to the poles, that's too cold, it's too complicated for many reasons. So if we go from, say, South Greenland to somewhere in the South Atlantic, it would be possible. It's not a crazy thing. We have large telescopes, we have experiments in the moon. So there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to do ocean basin scale wide array. And so the idea would be that it's science driven, and there are lots of questions that we can address. I'm not listing them here, but there's lots of exciting science that could only be addressed if we have this type of array. And so we are trying to push forward this idea. So we've built a community. This is a picture from a meeting that we had at UCL in 2025. Everybody's welcome to be involved. We had people from Japan, from the US, from Germany, France, Portugal, Spain, lots of UK, lots of countries, and everybody is welcome to join. So get in touch. And so to finalize, so I'm nearly on time, I think. I just want to summarize that. Hopefully I convinced you that we have this new high quality data from the largest so far ocean bottom seismology experiment in the Azores, Madeira and Canary Islands, actually in the Atlantic. We have hugely rich signals, including unexpected signals, as I mentioned. The data will be openly available in 2028. I'm really hoping that lots of discoveries beyond what we are doing will be done, because I think the data have really huge potential. We've already developed some novel machine learning methods, particularly based on this segmentation, semantic segmentation approach that I mentioned that gives us pixel level information. Remember that, which has been shown to be very effective, in particular for blue whale detections, both in our study region in the Atlantic, but also then transferable to the Indian Ocean. It's also useful for tracking instrument reverberations, but it could be applied to many other signals. From our initial tomography results, both with body and surface wave analysis, we are finding very, very exciting features. So particularly these tilted and complex, very 3D anomalies that seem to connect, at least beneath the Canaries, the deepest lower mantle to the shallower region, but also lots of lateral connections between all of these different archipelagos that we still need to explore, and it's still very much up for discussion. As discussed here. And finally, but not least, yes, we are dreaming to go from something like upflow to a whole basin experiment, putting the seismological community together, but also working together with marine biologists and oceanographers that we are already working with. And anyone is very, very welcome to join, and please get in touch. So thank you.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, and congratulations for the results. Quite very interesting results from upflow. So let's open our questions floor. So any question? Let's see. Actually, there's a very interesting question regarding whale sounds. Are musicians involved in the analysis of the data? This is from Petra Rona, the question.
Great. Yeah, actually, not really. Although, yeah, we for the actual analysis for the the science, let's say, we don't have musicians involved, but it's true that I think lots of synergies can be done with the music signal processing music community, and I think also it's a community that is also using a lot of new novel machine learning techniques. Actually, I mean, not with us, but as you know, Shazam, when Shazam started, the algorithm, so to identify songs, pop songs.
To identify the music.
Yeah, those algorithms were actually the first, one of the bases to develop the first detection, picking algorithms in seismology, actually by the Stanford group, Greg Barroza and others. So there have been some connections there, but we are not working with musicians in that sense. Although we are working with a jazz musician, but it's more for outreach and science communication. So during the expedition, actually both expeditions, we were in touch with this jazz musician, Leon Noble, a jazz musician and composer here based in London. And we sent him sounds from the ship, from the engines, from the sounds of recovering the instruments to actually sounds of testing the equipment when we tested, for instance, the releasers of the system, that release the instrument from the anchor that then enables it to come up. We sent him all of those signals because he wants to compose new music based on those signals. And he wrote some things like a blog entry about it with his thoughts. It's on the UPFLOW website. Please check it out. And we are still looking for funding to have a concert actually with his music, but it's being actually hard to find funding. I think this type of outreach projects are not so easy. Everybody always tells us, "Oh, that's amazing," but then nobody so far we haven't managed to secure funding, but we'll continue. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Very interesting. Okay, so let's see more questions. From Frederico Lira. On the Atlantic Array, what do you think you would need to see it come to fruition?
Yes, great question. Yeah, we need funding. That's the bottom line. So I think we've had, as I mentioned, many meetings and many brainstorming sessions about the concept, and we really have already a pretty good draft of this white paper. I hope to finish it very soon. We'll publish it, so the concept is there. But now the idea is to apply for funding, and we have had discussions about applying for European infrastructure funding. So, the type of funding that funds things like EPOS that you might have heard of, or EMSO, for instance. So it's that type of large infrastructure funding, which I don't think it's impossible. And so we are discussing, within maybe a year, hopefully trying to come up with a proposal for such funding. But of course, it's complex in our case because we need a lot of ship time. Ship time is actually the main limitation. Getting 100 OBSs, it might sound crazy, but it's not really these days. You can get 100 OBSs from manufacturers. I mean, we have the Canadian pool, for instance, that got over 100 instruments, all from the same manufacturer not so long ago, and it seems to be going well. They had hiccups at the beginning. So that's possible, but it's more the ship time. It's a big limitation. It's a lot of ship time. And again, I've discussed with existing European projects, such as the old Euro fleets that you might have heard, which are projects to coordinate ship time, and more recent days, Aquarius RI, and also had discussions with them. And so there are possibilities, but it's very expensive. And so even infrastructure calls, the budget might not be quite enough. So that's a bit the limitation. So we would need to try to get ship time, as partnerships, because probably within the funding available, it would not be enough. So that's one limitation, but we think we have a funding call. And the other thing is people. We would then need people that are available to come on the cruises, because it would be a lot of cruise time and contribute to the project. And again, we have a good body of people already, but the more the better. So please, Federico, join us, and anyone else. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Anna, for this answer. So let's see if it's something here. No. Okay. One more question from Jorge Miranda. Anna,
Hola.
concerning real disruptive conclusions, is there any you can disclose concerning, for example, the well-known Azores, Madeira, and Canary plumes?
Well known. I would not call them well known, and I think Miguel, you would agree with me, right? I think in the Azores it's still very much debated, right? I mean, I would not dare at the moment, I'm being conservative here, to come with very disruptive conclusions, mostly because we still need to do these more robustness tests to really check. For instance, here I see this as a connection, and Maria has already done many tests, and it seems that this would be true. It's not like an artifact from the inversions, but we need to do a bit further tests to really check are they connected or not. Now, the surface waves, as you can see, they seem to show really very clear connections. The anisotropy shows also very interesting patterns. And so right now, what our, let's say, disruptive, if you want to call it like that, conclusion right now, it looks like there is possibly, the African large low velocity province that is bringing up material, mostly towards the Canaries, actually, it looks like it. But then there's possibly some ponding of material at about this 300 kilometers depth, which is very interesting. There's also stuff deeper here at around the 600 kilometers discontinuity, which is kind of normal. But then we have as well here some ponding. This appears a lot. And our geodynamics colleagues, notably Maxim Balmer, says this could be maybe some indication of some thermochemical plume and some transformation in basalt that would make it kind of stay there. And then essentially basically branching, if you want, into the different archipelagos. And so this connection between them. So this is kind of our current interpretation. So deep, and then ponding, and then sort of branching into the three different archipelagos. But of course, we know that the geochemistry between these different three archipelagos is quite different, because there are other things that then play roles, such as, for instance, small-scale convection, notably driven by the Western African coast. So then it becomes quite messy. We have the ridge, obviously, that for sure has a huge impact as well, that then mixes things up. But it does seem that there are these very deep controls in the whole region. That's what I would conclude. But I'm now starting really to speculate. We need to do more on the seismology side, resolution tests, but also on the geodynamical side, do some actual simulations to see if it's actually compatible with what we are thinking about here.
Okay, Anna, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we don't have well, actually, I have a question.
Go for it.
It's more technical one. So regarding the deployment here, that the whole deployment of UPFLOW. So deploying and recovering the large network of instruments across the Atlantic. My question is, what was the biggest technical or logistical lesson that you learned from all this process? Because it's a huge mission, let's say, deploy all that.
The biggest lesson that I learned, and by the way, I that's something I have to say here, especially for the early career researchers. When I got into this, I never ever had coordinated a field experiment, even on land. Okay. And I had never been at sea. I had zero experience with ocean bottom seismology. And this is the beauty of the European Research Council. They want risk, and so I could make my proposal that, I'm going to have all of this methodology stuff, which is my strength, but my risk is going to be this amazing big experiment, but for which I have zero experience, which, normal research councils would be like, dream on, bye-bye. But of course, I gathered a team of people who could support, and IPMA's support and IPMA's partnership was crucial because we had a vessel, a vessel that was dedicated to the project. But so I learned a lot, it was very fast and very steep learning curve. But it's possible. So this is what I'm telling the message for early careers. It's possible. And my main lesson is you need time. You really need time, and you need to develop relationships and talk to the experts, talk to the people who know, and don't be shy to go and say, look, I know nothing about this. Can you teach me? And so I benefited a lot from, as I said, having the ship and, having somebody like Miguel, who is, he can make things happen like many other people, but, and Mafalda as well, who was, so having a team of logistics people for the ship. But then for all the instruments, we got instruments, as you can see from the list here. This is Bremerhaven in Germany. This is Ireland, Dublin. This is Guiomar, so that's Kiel in Germany. This is Lisbon. Okay, that's easy enough to get them to the ship. And this is Spain. So it was a logistical nightmare. And, Mafalda can also tell you, there were all sorts of big issues. But the key thing is that everybody, but really everybody, was really enthusiastic and trying to do the best that they could to help. And so the main lesson is you need the right team, the right people that support you and work together with you. And you can do wonderful things in that case. Yeah.
Great, thank you. It was a crazy mission, but
Yes. Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
results the
And I have to
results
say,
are very interesting.
yeah, the week before the 21 deployment started, I was thinking, why did I get myself into this? Because there were all sorts of
Yes, I
problems.
believe.
There was COVID, by the way, as well, which was not anticipated in the proposal. So we had to do quarantines and lots of vaccine tests, and you can imagine all sorts of complications. But as I say, I felt tired and a bit overwhelmed, but there were so many people always willing to help, that's the thing. You have to have the right people. If you feel that people will say, oh, I might participate, you need really true engagement and, enthusiasm and will
For all
to
the
help.
people.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
as I say, also don't be shy, because I think people can be a bit like, oh, I don't want to admit that I don't know anything, I don't know something, or in my case, nothing at the time. Just, people are very generous. This is also what I found, the colleagues, even at the proposal stage, I spent a lot of time talking with people like Luís Matias, Carlos Corella, but also colleagues in Germany that had lots of experience in France, Wayne Crawford, Karen Sigler. People, I talked about the Ram experiment. I talked a lot with these people. I had calls with them because this was kind of the same sort of experiment, but in the Atlantic. And they gave their time. They were incredibly generous, talking about their experiences. And I always asked them, what would you do differently? What do you advise me? So I learned a lot from those discussions, but you need time and not being shy, to approach people and discuss. Yeah.
Good advices. Okay, Anna, thank you. So I think that we don't have time for any more questions. I think there's no one, no more. See, no questions. So let's start wrapping up. So Anna, once more, thank you for this amazing talk and for sharing your work on the UPFLOW project. It was a really pleasure having you here. And thank you for everyone who joined us today. Your questions and participation were not very much, but were enough to enrich the session. So a reminder that today's section was recorded, okay, and will be available at the Air Center website. So to all, have a very good weekend, okay, and see you next time.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Obrigada, Rita.